tell you oftentimes we can turn around and say on our state tests that our students may score at 60, 70, 80% for that particular assessment. And then we can do a comparison and benchmark that against other valid tests for other countries across the globe, and we won't even rise above the 25th or 26th percentile in math, language, and science. And you sitting here worried about what Johnny is doing in relation to the folks down the street. The person down the street is not even in line to get Johnny's job when he graduates. You need to be concerned about who's sitting in China and Singapore and Japan. That's who your job is competing against, and you got to be thinking in that direction. We limit ourselves when we don't understand that we work and live within a global environment every single day. And I get folks who say, well, if he's number one in the class, then that means a lot. It does, depending upon what the curriculum was. Depends who else was sitting in the class. Anybody ever go to the physician? You go visit your doctor on a regular basis, get your checkup, your mammogram, your colonoscopy, all of those great things. Anybody ever stop and ask their physician what their class rank was when they graduated from medical school, what their GPA was? So you clearly could have a physician who's a C student that is working on you this evening in the hospital. But you don't know this. It's only as good as the information and data and the context within which you give it. What you do know is that they passed the board and therefore they are a certified physician. Is that right? So I want you to think about that. Because one of the things I recognized when I first came to PTA, I was reading an article in the New York Times and the New York Post, and the cover story read this way. It had a picture of a student holding his diploma, and the caption simply was, "A diploma I cannot read." Now that may seem like that's crazy. But tell me you haven't encountered a student when you start asking them, can you name 20 of the 50 states? And they can't even name you the one beyond the boundary where they currently live. You ask a student, can you tell me the name of the state capital? But you're about to graduate from high school. Can you tell me what career or profession you will pursue long term? And I tell folks all the time, you can think you're going to be a baller, but do the statistics and tell me how many people actually make it into the NBA and NFL every single year. And you have a greater likelihood of being Ben Carter, a pediatric neurosurgeon, than you do for playing for the Portland Trailblazers. That's a fact. That's not fiction. So we've got to get our children and our families to think differently about their educational journey. Parental involvement at the end of the day is the leading indicator of academic achievement. I told the secretary last week, saw him at Mom Congress, and I said, look, you all in the budget crisis. Now I could present you a check for all of the families that are involved in education across this nation, and it will tremendously help the deficit from our perspective. It'll be so many zeros, it will be simply astounding. I said, Secretary Duncan, you know the research because it came out of the University of Chicago. An active, engaged parent, the value of their activity is about $1,000 per year. So what we need to do collectively is getting folks to understand that, especially in light of this recession, if there were ever a time for us to band together to push an educational agenda united as one but not divided as some, that time would be now. So but we need to get every single parent to get up, get out, and do something. And I'm not saying do something means I've got to come to school 5 days a week and give you 2 hours a day. Because some people do that and they're still not getting the effect that they need for their specific child learning process. You're just keeping yourself busy. Does that make sense? I ain't say do you like it. I just said do it make sense. Because I already know. I tell our PTA members that in some locations, well, that's what involvement is. That's what involvement is to you, boo. Because you got time to do that. But for a parent who's working 2 jobs but still going to school at night, the fact that I can get my children clothed, in bed, get their homework done, and back to school the next morning, that's involvement to me in my situation and circumstances. You've got to think differently about what that looks like. So I ask folks to be very careful about how you try to describe what effective parental involvement and engagement looks like unless you have a full understanding of the totality of the situation and circumstance. I had a homeless parent of a 4th grade student who worked in the junkyard on the weekends. But he spent more constructive time with his son Chaz every single weekend. The Chaz had other students who didn't know his dad was homeless and worked in the junkyard wanting to spend time with Chaz's dad. Now, I had students who had both parents in the household that worked very good jobs. But you tell me what happened in Chaz's experience with his dad on a Saturday that would make a student from a traditional home want to say, I want to go home with Chaz. There's something fundamentally different about the experience of how you connect to a child, and it's not based upon income, wealth, or race, or geography. It's based upon, does your child feel that they have a connection with you, not by what you give them, but how you do things with them. 2 different things. I'll never forget the day that my youngest nephew, Dwayne, was Christmas had passed, and he was staying with me, and his grandparents had left, his other in-laws had left. And I simply said, well, Dwayne, your report card is going to come in the mail, and I just want to clarify something with you, son. Now look, all these items that you got are great. I know what your grades are going to be without even being a psychic, but I know what's going to come because I know how much homework you did or did not do, and I read the progress reports every single week. And I just want you to know that I meant what I said when you moved in at the beginning of the school year. If you do not meet the expectation, all the stuff you think you have, I will repossess. I want to introduce a new word in your vocabulary. It's called repossession. It means when you do not do your part, someone else takes it back from you. Do you understand what repossess means? Yes, sir. Can you spell repossess? We went through a whole educational lesson on repossession. Then the grades came in the mail, and I said, Dwayne, you got some mail today. He said, no, I didn't, because I can read. That's not addressed to me. It's addressed to the parents or caregivers of Byron Garrett. Uncle Byron, that's you. And he slid it back across the table. I said, well, Dwayne, I'm also doing something that people like to call gift. I'm giving you a gift, so I'm giving this back to you, and you can open the envelope, and then I want you to read what your grades are. Dwayne didn't read what the grades were. He went upstairs and began packing his stuff. I went upstairs and said, listen, Dwayne, I want you to understand this. Do you understand what's happening? Because I don't want you to be upset. I know you're going to call your grandmother and tell my mom that I'm crazy, but I'm her favorite child, so I'm not worried. Dwayne went upstairs, got his Halo system and Xbox and all his stuff together. And I said, Dwayne, you know what? He said, well, Uncle Byron, can we negotiate? I said, well, what does negotiate mean? So we go through this process. He's now doing the English lesson for me. We're going to negotiate. And Uncle Byron, surely you got a master's degree, you can still negotiate. So I'm thinking like my dad would, you better take 2 steps back. But I tell you that because what I then decided with Dwayne was, you're right, Dwayne, we will negotiate. Out of all the things you got, you can keep one item. I wanted to test his intellect for street smarts, not just book smarts. I had gotten the progress report in the grade, so I understand the book smart quotient. Let me check the street smarts and common sense, which my grandmother would say is not so common. And Dwayne failed that test. So Dwayne, you can keep one item. Dwayne decided great, and he decided he was going to keep his Xbox, and I was so disappointed. Because I looked at him dead in the face and said, are you sure out of all the things that are in your room that you got this holiday season, are you sure that's the one item you want to keep? Dwayne said, yes, sir, I'm going to keep the game system. So we're great, move it all across the hall, put it in my room. And about 5 minutes later, Uncle Byron, can we renegotiate? I said, what's wrong, Dwayne? He said, well, you know, the Xbox won't play because there's no TV for it. Yeah, those are my nephews, but he graduates in 2 weeks from high school with a 3.2 GPA. He goes to San Diego State this fall. And I'm excited. And I say that to you because we've got to understand that you've got to be willing to do as a parent whatever it takes. I have to tell people all the time, your job is not to be your friend's, your child's friend, their buddy, their boy, their girl, their BFF, their pal. That is not your function. They have a whole school full of folks that want to fulfill those duties. Because my other nephew, who's a little bit older, Brandon, decided he would delete me as a friend after I critiqued his MySpace page. And then he emailed me a Christmas list. And I emailed it back to him and said, please do not send this to me. Send this to one of your friends on your MySpace page. You don't want the criticisms and you don't want the rewards that come with the relationship. Well, you're my uncle. You're right, and as your uncle, my job is to love you unconditionally regardless of what it is you choose to do. But it doesn't mean I've got to give you anything that is beyond the basic necessities. Do you have food, shelter, and clothing, as my grandmother would say, and you have all 3 of those items. Therefore, there is nothing else I'm legally required to do. Everything else we'll reserve in the friendship category, and since you and I are not friends, delete. I say that in all seriousness because you've got to get to a point in life as parents and as a loved one that you recognize your role and your responsibility and you walk within that with the authority that you have. You need to understand that it is a partnership, it's a collective action that all of us undertake when it comes to educating our children.